In today's video, we'll be tackling Tokyo Ghoul. And Tokyo Ghoul is honestly a very special series to me. And it's the first series I've ever read from beginning to end, all the way back when I was only 13 years old. As Tokyo Ghoul has been a series that's laid in my heart for a long time, I've decided to create a video surrounding the moment that piqued my interest into the series. This being the torture of Kaneki. In this video, I'll be doing an analysis on Kaneki's torture while he was held captive by Jason, using what we know from all of the Tokyo Ghoul content that's been released. We set the scene with Kaneki, Banjo, and a couple of other characters attempting to escape the imprisonment of Aogiri. And as they make a bit of headway, they're sensed by one of the Bin brothers. Banjo then sacrifices himself to hold off the Bin brother in order to allow the other characters to escape. And as Kaneki attempts to flee, he questions himself, am I okay with doing this? What could Banjo hope to do on his own anyway? Kaneki then turns around and goes to assist Banjo, telling him that they will escape together. And as Kaneki is actually able to pin down one of the brothers, the other one then comes in to assist. And not only that, Jason enters the scene as well. With these circumstances, all hope of escape has vanished. Jason then tells the escape team that there are punishments to breaking Aogiri Tree's rules, and that punishment is usually death. But truth be told, he couldn't care less if any of them were to escape or die, instead displaying his interest in Kaneki, due to inheriting Rize's Kagune. He then tells Kaneki that nobody notices his true value, and that he will spare all of his friends if Kaneki were to become his subordinate. Nico then states to Kaneki that his friends are not their responsibility anyway, and they don't lose anything by allowing them to set free, as they are Ayato's property. Kaneki still doubts the both of them, but he states that he'll go anyway, telling himself that he had no choice and now everyone is safe. Jason instantly tells Nico to now put Kaneki's friends in his isolation cells. Something I want to point out here is that at this point in the story, Kaneki is very kind and passive, and this hinders his logical decision making by a lot, as Kaneki had the power to kill everybody but Nico there at this moment if he wanted to, including Jason, and yet he doesn't. He proceeds to sacrifice himself in order to believe that he's making a heroic decision by guaranteeing everyone's safety, believing that it was the best outcome when in fact, it will result in the worst for everybody. Instead of a person who hurts others, become the person who gets hurt. It's okay if you lose because of your love and kindness. A kind person only needs those things in order to be happy. Instead of a person who hurts others, become the person who... These words left behind by his mother are ones that haunt him from beyond her grave. As we know now, Kaneki's mother was very abusive toward him. And at the time of this torture, he still romanticized her due to how traumatic the abuse was. As his mother took her frustration and stress out on Kaneki by beating him almost daily, these were words used against Kaneki, not so he could protect himself or others, but it was so he'd refuse to fight back against the abuse. These are the words that led Kaneki all the way up to this chair we see him in. And as he calls out for his mother, could this be the cry for help we originally thought it was? Or could it be Kaneki being reminded of his mother's abuse due to the torture he's currently enduring? We cut back to 10 days earlier, with Kaneki asking Jason of the conditions that are required of him. Jason says all Kaneki needs to do is just listen, and he'll be fine. They enter a room, and we see a horribly tortured man with Kaneki asking if he's passed away, to which Jason says that was his punishment for making a mistake. Jason asks Kaneki if he knows anything about the RC suppressants, and explains that these injections take away the strength of a ghoul, allowing the surgical knives and anything else to pass through their weakened bodies with ease. But due to how strong the ghouls normally are, a normal needle cannot be used on them. Kaneki's then asked, so do you know where the injection is given for a ghoul? He's unable to answer, and so, Jason stabs him in the eye. And this is where the torture begins, as Kaneki explains that he had been chosen as Jason's target for his warped amusement. He describes this experience by stating, imagine the absolute worst thing you can, and this will be above that. Kaneki is then tortured by having his strength suppressed by the injection, and Jason slowly tearing off his fingers and toes using pliers. And after Jason would finish his process, he would allow the suppressants to wear off and then forcefully feed Kaneki in order for him to regenerate his limbs again, restarting the entire process. Meanwhile doing this, Kaneki is forced to count backwards by 7 starting from 1000, all the way to 0 in order to work his brain and maintain his sanity. Something of note here is that with this torture method, it's suggested that Kaneki would never reach 0, or in other words, freedom. Because when you count down by 7 from 1000, you will actually never hit 0, instead stopping at 1, to remind Kaneki that, although he can be close to escaping, it will never actually happen. Jason tortures Kaneki more, losing control over himself. And as he fears that he may go too far and eliminate Kaneki by torturing him too much, he calls over Nico and impales him, letting out his excitement, which implies, you know what. And this essentially communicates to us that Jason finds the same amount of pleasure in torturing others that a normal person would find in having intercourse. Kaneki, after suffering through this, then says to himself, if I were keeping a secret and this treatment was all for the sake of making me tell that secret, I think I would be more at ease. But when faced with this purposeless torture, simply for the sake of torture, I wonder if I'm supposed to feel anything more than hopelessness. As if the physical burden wasn't enough, Kaneki also has to deal with the fact that this is happening to him for almost no reason, and this makes it all the more agonizing. But something else I have to point out here is how this quote could explain why Kaneki may have resorted to idolizing and romanticizing his mother despite her betraying him with abuse. As Kaneki insinuates that he'd be able to withstand torture easier if there was a purpose behind it. And as twisted as it is, Kaneki was a stress relief for his mother, who endlessly suffered after the loss of his father. And Kaneki was more than aware of everything she had to do in order to take care of him and her, and how far she pushed herself to do so. Kaneki may have perceived it in this way, but who knows. As Kaneki here begins to turn mostly white due to the immense stress and pain his body is undergoing, Jason begins to inform Kaneki of how he turned out to be such a sadistic person, saying it began when he was taken to the 23rd Ward Ghoul Detention Center and was allowed to live due to knowing tons of information about the ghouls in another ward. And in this detention center lied an investigator with a couple of screws loose, and it's shown that the torture that Jason's currently doing to Kaneki was the torture that was originally done to him by this investigator. The panels laying over Jason's body saying that all of the drawbacks of this world can be adequately explained by the affected person's insecurity in their own abilities. The weak are trampled down, infringed upon, violated, and afflicted. Kaneki is here because of his weakness. Nothing more, nothing less. If Kaneki had believed in himself and his capabilities and wanted Jason dead, he would have been dead. As sad as it is to say such things, it's the truth. As Jason goes on about his torture, he tells him that he desperately thought ways he could escape the endless pain, beginning to delude himself into believing that he was the investigator doing the torturing instead, and he eventually became to feel as if they were one, and at some point, a chance for Jason to reverse the roles appeared and he took it, describing it to be an excitement that he would never be able to forget. And this is why when Jason confronts the Bin brothers, he makes such a big deal about doing whatever he wants. Because the most traumatic moments in his life were moments where he could not do anything but suffer. And after Jason twists his mind in order to merge with his captors, it shifted his mind into a state where he perceives his life as freedom in comparison to others, and to seek joy is to seek inflicting pain onto others. This is also why Jason holds isolation cells for his prisoners. As Jason wraps up his past, he then explains to Kaneki that he's a good subject because the Kakuho he inherited from Rize is special, allowing Kaneki to regenerate from almost anything without much issue. And he then puts that regeneration to the test out of curiosity, grabbing a Chinese red-headed centipede. As these centipedes are carnivorous, he inserts it into Kaneki's ear, allowing it to burrow into his brain. And as it goes into his head, he begins to shake rapidly as he can feel his brain being eaten alive, meanwhile regenerating, causing pure agony in Kaneki. And he states that, "I could hear someone laughing far off in the distance. It was me." Both Kaneki and Jason begin to laugh mindlessly. I wonder how comforting it would be to go mad like this. Kill me. Please. Kill me. Kaneki then feels a palm touch his face and he asks who's there. And it's Rize, saying, "Aren't you thinking this is bullshit? Aren't you, Kaneki?" And Kaneki expresses disbelief at her presence. They now begin to speak. Before I get into their conversation though, I want to point out that Kaneki feels as if his ghoul genes essentially hold him prisoner. He's never asked for those genetics, and he absolutely despised them. Currently, he's in the worst predicament of his life because of them as well. As Jason once began to identify with his torturer and emulate him as he was being tortured, Kaneki is emulating Rize, who's been torturing him from the moment they've merged into one. This is why Kaneki continues to imagine Rize's presence even after these events. Rize points out to Kaneki that his hair has changed color, and then she repeats his quote to him: "Instead of a person who hurts others, become a person who gets hurt." She asks him, "Are you seriously living like this?" Kaneki responds saying, "My mother taught me that, so." "So? You're living while following those instructions? I wonder whose funeral that is." "My father?" Kaneki then explains to Rize that his father passed away when he was only 4 years old, so he doesn't even remember his face. But what he remembers the most is when he collected his ashes. And although he did not know what that meant, Kaneki knew it was something scary, and that he had felt a vague fear at that very moment. Kaneki then communicates that since his father used to read a lot, he decided to pick up the books his father once read, saying that this allowed him to feel as if he were having a conversation with him. I want to take this opportunity to mention that Kaneki's lack of a father figure in his life more than likely plays a role into his very passive mindset and his lack of aggressiveness for the beginning segments of Tokyo Ghoul, as this is what led him up here to this moment, and the same lack of a father figure playing a role into Kaneki's intense anger and his emotionally driven decision making toward the latter half that got him and his best friend almost killed. Kaneki seems to have a father figure mentioned or involved in almost every instance of a personality change throughout the series, except for the one where he's finally a father himself. I really do believe that Sui Ishida mentions Kaneki's father in order to let the readers know that Kaneki's father being around could have prepared him to become a much stronger and more capable man than he was in that moment. As Kaneki has suffered neglect and abuse his entire life, he's never had anybody to teach him to stand up for himself, nor has he ever been shown what it means to truly protect others. Instead, now having to learn it the hard way. To further drive this point, all of Kaneki's personalities after the introduction of Arima into his life seem to be much more stoic and capable of logical decision making as leaders until put under extreme and excruciating stress. This is likely to replicate Arima, as Kaneki truly saw Arima as a father and a man he looked up to. The first thing he thought of in their final battle was not how to protect everybody, not how to win, not how to survive, but what Arima thought of Kaneki's decision in this moment, and if Arima was genuinely disappointed in Kaneki for betraying the CCG. And although Kaneki was completely decimated in their first rounds, I don't think Kaneki could bring himself to hurt his own father. And this is why Arima told him to stop screwing around or everybody will die. Arima's impact on Kaneki's life for the better has been noticed, despite all of the horrible things he's once done to him. We move on to Kaneki and Rize viewing a play from Kaneki's past, with Rize pointing out that Kaneki had the lead role. Kaneki then says that he was forced to be the lead, as he told the entire class that he knew the story behind the play, and thus the class prompted him to take the lead role, and of course, Kaneki couldn't refuse at that point. He goes on to say that he remembers the play surprisingly well due to his mother going through the entire script with him and helping him understand the meaning of the difficult words used in the play. As Kaneki thinks of these days, he begins to romanticize the memory of his mother, saying that despite being in a fatherless home, he was never lonely. With his mother's presence in the books his father left him, he truly felt comforted. Kaneki then says that his mother was an absolutely splendid person, and as she worked, completed all the chores, and never troubled anybody else, she never had a bad expression through all of it. Kaneki was genuinely proud of her, and he finally mentions that her food was amazing, especially her hamburger steak. Although he doesn't remember how it tasted anymore, and that he can't possibly remember the taste either. Rize then interrupts saying, "I wonder if your mother was truly a kind and splendid person." Rize saying this as soon as Kaneki mentions that he cannot remember was likely to allude to the truth of his mother. We move on to the next scene in his memories, where Rize asks about the money she sees, and Kaneki explains to her that it's an allowance for his aunt from his mother. And since his aunt never has enough money, she'd constantly nag Kaneki's mother for it, with Kaneki's mother only complying because she couldn't leave his aunt to herself. As his mother worked all evening and night and came home to work even more, she exhausted herself. I never saw my mother resting, and then, she was overworked. She didn't have an illness or anything. She merely worked too much. Kaneki suppressed these memories after her death to create a rosy picture of a loving mother who worked herself too hard, when instead, she was a weak, abusive, downright pathetic person who was knowingly and willingly used by her sister and who violently beat her own son. Rize chimes in and says, I wonder if she really needed to go that far, which makes sense. This is why Rize is questioning this philosophy that his mother left to him, as it did nothing but result in her passing away with nothing to show for it, and leaving her child all alone in this world. And the result of her sacrifice doesn't even end there. It results in Kaneki moving into his aunt's home and her neglecting and abusing him there. Suffering such neglect and isolation after the passing of his mother leaves him with only Hide, his only emotional support as a child. His best friend was the only thing he had in this world for a long time, and this is why Kaneki clings so desperately onto him, and everybody else he considers to be a friend as well. Even jumping into death in the final act of the story, Kaneki was extremely desperate to find people who loved and cared about him his entire life. So when he does finally find them, he'll never let them go. As Jason returns to torture Kaneki more, Rize takes her leave from Kaneki's mind. And due to Kaneki's resilience, Jason wants to try something new on him. This being a game of mother and child, and this shatters Kaneki, as these are two people from the initial escape team he'd formed before Jason negotiated with him. Jason now asks Kaneki, which one should he spare? And Kaneki screams asking, why didn't he let them go? What did he possibly do to deserve this? This prompts Jason to revel in Kaneki's terror as he goes and asks him once more, which one? Kaneki then says he's unable to choose, with Jason responding that if you don't choose one, then both will go. So he asks one more time, who will you save? As Kaneki looks at the mother, she mouths to him, choose her son. Kaneki still suffers with indecisiveness, as he believes that this is the equivalent to being the one who commits the crime himself. Kaneki then says, if you're going to kill someone, then kill me. Kaneki displays that useless sacrificial nature of his, and again, he will be punished once more. This causes Jason to throw a fit, and he proceeds to eliminate the child, and after that, eliminating the mother. Kaneki attempts to sacrifice himself again, and yet, this only results in him losing everything. Jason then says to Kaneki that this is your fault, hypocrite. And in this instance, Jason was absolutely correct. Kaneki could have prevented this from happening all the way from the very beginning. Kaneki then breaks down and asks, why does this only happen to me? And he begs for somebody to save him. And then Rize comes back telling him that nobody will save him, and the only person here is you. Even if she is a figment of his imagination, relying on a dead person is no more than ridiculous. She explains to Kaneki that he has bad luck, but he was the one who invited that bad luck. Luck doesn't exist, it's no more than a combination of situations, and who was the person who created these situations? All the drawbacks of this world can be explained by the affected person's insecurities and their own abilities. Rize explains to Kaneki that everything from the beginning was because of your ignorance to the ways of the world. You were tricked by me, tampered with by the doctor, and turned into a monster. And in the end, every single one of these circumstances was your fault. She mentions his mother's ideology of self-sacrifice, saying that it's so kind and splendid, but also why you've gone through all of this. Saying that he could have ended Jason anytime he wanted to. And like him, his mother was the same when it came to her sister. If she ignored her, she'd be alive today. She chose both, Kaneki and her sister, and in the end, lost both of them. The same exact way that Kaneki chose both the mother and her child, resulting in the loss of both. Rize then says if Kaneki's mother truly loved him, that she would have sacrificed her sister in order to ensure his safety, right? And this causes Kaneki to break down in tears, as this is what he's always believed deep down inside. And this is why he continues to lie to himself about his mother, because if he doesn't, he will have to face the truth that his mother may not have loved him. in that he had always been alone from the very beginning. Kaneki begins to scream, asking why his mother left him, saying that he wishes she chose him and that she lived for him. Even if he had to watch her aunt die, Kaneki affirms this and Rize praises him. As she says, there are times you must sacrifice one thing in order to protect another, and his mother cannot. His sacrificial nature inherited from his mother was not kindness but only weakness. Kaneki's adherence to his moral high grounds caused him to believe in suffering for the sake of others, and his human side would not allow him to kill, making the ghoul side of him suffer for the sake of his human friends. Kaneki processed the possibility of Jason killing off everybody he loves carelessly because he refused to acknowledge the ghoul side of himself. This talk with Rize allows Kaneki to realize how important it is to be strong in order to protect the ones that you love. Kaneki musters the will to fight, stating that he will not forgive Jason or Aogiri, these people who throw away lives so carelessly, and that he will prevent Aogiri from gaining power in order to protect those that he loves. He will no longer show any mercy to those who attempt to steal from him, and if anybody threatens his peace, he'll kill them too. As the first Kaneki resembles denial, Kaneki is able to move past this stage of grief and enter into the next. This Kaneki is now able to finally process the anger and frustration that's been building up inside of him throughout all of these years, and he accepts Rize as part of him, metaphorically representing the ghoul DNA that he's been rejecting up until this point. And now, he finally resolves within himself to fight. After this, you know the rest. Kaneki crushes Jason and begins to torture him the same way he had tortured Kaneki, repeating the cycle that Jason's original captor began when he was originally imprisoned. After this event, Kaneki begins to pursue the power that will allow him to protect others by force, by consuming Jason's Kagune. He then moves on to save Toka by brutally dispatching Ayato and torturing him when he really didn't need to. While a cool and very standout moment, it also displays that in a way, Jason did win in the mental battle, living on through Kaneki's actions, as his battle against Ayato, in my opinion, after so many years and the story concluding, was a sad display of what was to come of Kaneki and his character moving forward. Kaneki, due to his mental instability, takes his lesson learned from his torture to the absolute extreme, almost becoming a monster like the one that scarred him. Although this isn't the end point of Kaneki's development, nowhere near, it was certainly a step in the right direction, as at this moment, Kaneki became a person who will never allow anybody or anything to be stolen from him again, and this trait becoming fundamental to his character from here on out. However, in the end, it wasn't enough. Jason's torture does spark Kaneki to undertake an unobtainable and dangerous quest, this quest being one to change the entire world, but that'll be for another time. Woo! So I've got to say that this is certainly like the longest video I've done, and it was certainly fun to cover Tokyo Ghoul. But I won't keep you here any longer. If you enjoyed, feel free to leave a like, and especially subscribe please, because I only have 2.6 of my viewers on this channel have actually subscribed, which is kind of crazy, but it's not. I've gotten tons of views in the past month, so I get it. But whatever, my bad. Anyways, have a great day, guys. You know the rest. Peace out. I'll see you in the next one.